"I speak 16 languages," the young black woman said in the courtroom. The judge laughs but then freezes. Jasmine Williams was there over a debt she couldn't pay, wearing an orange uniform that made her look even more vulnerable in the face of all that formality. The courtroom was full of people who looked at her with contempt, whispering among themselves about just another young woman trying to cheat the system. That's when the judge asked about her professional qualifications, and she lifted her head and said firmly, "I speak 16 languages, Your Honor." Dr. Arthur Harrison Miller let out a laugh that echoed throughout the room, shaking his head like someone who had just heard the most absurd lie of the day. 16 languages, he repeated, still laughing. "Young lady, are you trying to impress this court with fantasies? Not even I, with 40 years on the bench and 2 doctorate degrees, speak that many languages." Jasmine felt the weight of every pair of eyes on her. She knew that moment would define not just her immediate future, but perhaps her entire life. She took a deep breath and began speaking in Mandarin, then Arabic, Russian, French, Italian, German. With each language flowing from her lips, the silence in the courtroom grew heavier. The judge's smile vanished completely when she perfectly translated a document in Japanese that was on his desk, a text he had received from Eastern University that very morning. Dr. Arthur felt a chill run down his spine as he realized he might have seriously underestimated that young woman. How can you speak all these languages?" he asked, trying to keep his composure. "Your Honor, when you grow up in the South Side and have to work from the age of 12, you learn to get by any way you can. I cleaned offices, restaurants, doctors' offices. I'd listen to the conversations, pay attention. My head has always been good at memorizing sounds and words." On the other side of the courtroom, Bernard Vance watched everything with growing irritation. He was the owner of the small building where Jasmine rented a studio apartment in downtown. She had been 3 months behind on rent, and he had decided to make an example of her. In truth, Bernard had other reasons for wanting to get rid of her, but no one there knew that yet. "Your Honor," Bernard's lawyer interrupted, "my client might know a few words in other languages, but that doesn't change the fact that she owes 3 months' rent and has no way to pay. She's a problematic tenant who has already caused trouble in the building." Jasmine turned to him, her eyes blazing with indignation. "Problematic? I never made noise, never bothered anyone. The only thing I did was lose my job when the translation company I worked for shut down without warning. And you know that very well." "You worked at a translation company?" the judge asked, now genuinely interested. "I worked as a cleaner, but I always helped the translators whenever they needed a word or expression they couldn't remember. Especially in the African and Asian languages I learned from the kids at the shelter where I grew up." Bernard felt a growing unease. He hadn't expected her to mention the details of her work. In fact, there was a specific reason he wanted to remove her from that apartment, and the less she talked about her former profession, the better for him. At the back of the courtroom, a gray-haired woman was watching everything with special attention. Dr. Eleanor Montgomery was a retired lawyer who came to the courthouse twice a week just to observe interesting cases. At 70, she still had a sharp eye for detecting when something wasn't right in a situation. "Young lady," said the judge, "I'm going to give you a chance to prove what you're saying. My assistant will bring some documents in different languages. If you can translate them properly, I'll consider that a relevant factor in your current financial situation." While waiting for the documents, Jasmine tried to control her nervousness. She knew this was her only chance to show she wasn't just another person trying to game the system. Her eyes briefly met Eleanor's, who gave her an encouraging smile. The assistant returned with a folder full of papers. The first document was in technical German, discussing industrial patents. Jasmine read it aloud, translating fluidly. The second was a commercial contract in Arabic, which she deciphered without hesitation. The third caught her by surprise. It was a poem in Hungarian, a language she had learned from a refugee at St. Jude's Outreach Center over 15 years ago. "My God," someone in the audience murmured, "she really does know it." Dr. Arthur was impressed, but also confused. How could someone so young and seemingly without resources have acquired such vast knowledge? He began to suspect that perhaps there was more to this story than met the eye. "Ms. Jasmine, where exactly did you learn Hungarian? That's a fairly rare language." At St. Jude's Outreach Centre, where I grew up until I was 18. There was a Hungarian woman there, Mrs. Esther, who took care of the refugee children. She had lost her entire family in the war and came to the country when she was young. She always told us stories in Hungarian to help us fall asleep. I was fascinated by the sounds of the words. Bernard was visibly uneasy with the direction of the conversation. He signaled his lawyer to speak up again. Your Honor, regardless of the defendant's language skills, the fact remains that she didn't pay the rent. My client has rights that need to be respected. Of course, replied the judge, but I'm trying to understand how someone with such exceptional qualifications ended up in a situation of default. Ms. Jasmine, tell me more about your work at the translation company. Jasmine took a deep breath. That part of the story was complicated, and she feared it could hurt her even more. I started there as a janitor, Your Honor, but Dr. Victor Thornton, who was the owner, began to notice that I understood conversations in other languages. Little by little, he asked me to help with simple translations, especially when clients called and the official translators weren't around. And were you paid extra for that? No, sir. He said it was part of my learning, that I should be grateful for the opportunity. I was just happy to use my knowledge to help. Eleanor, from the back, felt a growing indignation. She perfectly recognized that pattern of exploitation she had seen for decades in the courts. A talented person being taken advantage of without receiving due recognition or compensation. And what happened to that company? Continued the judge. Overnight, Dr. Victor said he was closing it. He didn't explain why properly, just said everyone was let go. When I went to claim my labor rights, I found out he had disappeared with all the company's documents. Bernard shifted uncomfortably in his chair. The judge noticed his agitation. Mr. Bernard, did you know the tenant's employer? No. I mean, I've heard of him, but I never had direct contact, he answered quickly. Jasmine turned to look at him with surprise. There was something in his tone that didn't match his words. She began to suspect that perhaps there was a connection between the two men that she didn't know about. The judge called a 15-minute recess to better analyze the situation. As people stepped out into the hallway, Eleanor approached Jasmine. My dear, can I speak with you for a moment? Of course, ma'am. I'm Eleanor Montgomery, a lawyer. Retired, but still active. I'm picking up on some strange things about your case. Are you sure you know the whole truth about your old boss and this landlord? Jasmine looked toward Bernard, who was nervously speaking in the hallway with his lawyer. Do you think they know each other? More than that, dear. When you mentioned the name Victor Thornton, I saw your landlord's reaction. It wasn't the reaction of someone who just heard of a person. At that moment, Jasmine began to understand that maybe her situation wasn't just a simple case of default. Maybe there were forces working against her that she hadn't even imagined. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, feel free to hit like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, continuing. When they returned to the session, the judge had a more serious expression on his face. He had used the break to make some calls and look further into the translation company's situation. Miss Jasmine, I've uncovered some interesting information about Thornton Translations. The company didn't go bankrupt due to financial issues. It was shut down because of tax and labor irregularities. There are several former employees complaining about unpaid wages. Bernard turned visibly pale. His lawyer tried to intervene, but the judge silenced him with a gesture. Even more interesting is that Mr. Victor Thornton is a partner in a real estate venture, together with Mr. Bernard Vance. The entire courtroom turned to look at Bernard, who seemed to have shrunk in his chair. Jasmine felt as if the floor had opened up beneath her feet. Everything was starting to make sense. Is that right, Mr. Bernard? Asked the judge in a stern tone. Your Honor, this has nothing to do with the default case. It has everything to do with it, Jasmine exploded, standing up. You wanted to get me out of the apartment because I know too much about what happened at that company. I saw documents, I overheard conversations I wasn't supposed to hear. Eleanor smiled discreetly. The young woman was starting to connect the dots on her own. What kind of conversations, Miss Jasmine? Asked the judge. Dr. Victor received calls in other languages, mainly Arabic and Mandarin. I always thought it was odd because the company's official translations were much simpler. But he talked about money transfers, about accounts in other countries. Bernard stood up abruptly. "Your Honor, these are just speculations from a cleaning lady. She has no way to prove anything she's saying." "I can prove it," said Jasmine with growing conviction. "I memorized several of those conversations. I can repeat them word for word in every language he used." The silence in the courtroom was deafening. Eleanor realized that the young woman had just put herself in a very dangerous situation. If she really knew about financial irregularities, that would explain why Bernard was so desperate to remove her. "Miss Jasmine," said the judge cautiously, "these are very serious accusations. If you have knowledge of illegal activities, you should have sought out the proper authorities." "I tried, Your Honor, but who was going to believe a 23-year-old cleaning lady saying she understood conversations in Arabic about money laundering? I didn't have concrete proof, just what I'd heard." Bernard whispered something urgent to his lawyer, who asked for permission to step out with his client for a private conversation. The judge granted another 10-minute break. In the hallway, Eleanor pulled Jasmine into a more secluded corner. "My dear, you're messing with very dangerous things. If there really is money laundering involved, these people aren't simply going to let you walk away." "But I can't pretend I don't know anything anymore. They took my job, now they want to take my home. How far will they go to silence me?" "That's exactly why you need proper legal protection. I'm going to help you, but you need to tell me everything, down to the smallest detail." Jasmine looked at that grey-haired woman, who had appeared like an angel in her life. For the first time in months, she felt like maybe she wasn't alone in this fight. "Would you really do that for me? You don't even know me." "Child, I spent 45 years defending people like you. I'm not going to stop now just because I'm officially retired." When they returned to the courtroom, Bernard and his lawyer had a proposal. "Your Honor," said the lawyer, "my client would like to withdraw all charges against Ms. Jasmine. We've reached an understanding that the debt can be forgiven due to the special circumstances of the case." Jasmine was about to accept immediately, but Mrs. Eleanor held her arm. "And in exchange for what?" asked Mrs. Eleanor, identifying herself as Jasmine's new attorney. Bernard's lawyer hesitated. "Only that Ms. Jasmine agrees not to make any more unfounded allegations about businesses she doesn't have proper knowledge of." "In other words," Mrs. Eleanor translated, "you want to silence her in exchange for forgiving a debt that may not even be legitimate." The judge was watching the whole negotiation with growing interest. His experience told him that when parties start making strange deals, there's usually something much more serious behind it. "Mr. Bernard, can you explain this partnership you have with Mr. Victor Thornton?" "It's just a small real estate investment, Your Honor. Nothing related to the tenant's case." "Interesting, because I just received a call from the Financial Investigations Department. It seems a search and seizure warrant is being prepared for the Thornton Translations offices. Something about suspicions of using the company for illegal activities." Bernard turned ashen. Jasmine felt a mix of fear and satisfaction. Finally, someone was taking her suspicions seriously. "Your Honor," said Mrs. Eleanor, "I would like to request special protection for my client. She may be an important witness in future investigations." "Granted. Ms. Jasmine, from now on you are under the court's protection. Any attempt at intimidation or retaliation must be immediately reported to the authorities." Bernard abruptly stood up and left the courtroom with his lawyer, leaving behind a tense atmosphere. Jasmine realized that this partial victory could be just the beginning of her troubles. In the following days, Jasmine's life changed completely. Mrs. Eleanor took her to stay in a safe apartment while the investigations continued. More importantly, she began teaching Jasmine about her legal rights and how to properly document everything she knew. "Child, you have an extraordinary gift," Mrs. Eleanor said one afternoon as they were reviewing documents. "But a gift without opportunity gets you nowhere. Let's change that." Mrs. Eleanor used her contacts to secure a partial scholarship for Jasmine at a private university. The program would be in liberal arts with a specialization in translation. For the first time in her life, Jasmine would see her skills formally recognized and developed. But Victor Thornton hadn't completely disappeared. A week after the trial, he called Jasmine. "You don't know who you're messing with," he said, his voice threatening. Better forget everything you think you know. I recorded this call, Jasmine replied calmly, and I've already sent a copy to my lawyer and the proper authorities. She wasn't lying. Mrs. Eleanor had taught her the importance of documenting any attempt at intimidation. The silence on the other end of the line said it all. The investigation into Thornton Translations revealed a sophisticated money laundering network that used the company as a front. Fake clients placed orders for large volumes of document translations, paying amounts far above market value. The money was then transferred to offshore accounts through a network of shell companies. Jasmine was called in several times to give her statement. Her ability to reproduce entire conversations in different languages became a crucial tool for the investigation. The investigators were impressed with the accuracy of her linguistic memory. "It's like having a multilingual human tape recorder," one of the investigators commented to Eleanor. "She can recall not just the words, but the nuances, the accents, the hesitations. It's extraordinary." Meanwhile, Jasmine began her studies at the university. The first few months were challenging. She had exceptional practical knowledge, but lacked a formal theoretical foundation. Many classmates looked at her with distrust, especially when they found out about her humble origins. Professor Dr. Martha Sterling was the first to recognize Jasmine's exceptional potential. During a class on applied linguistics, she asked the students to do a simultaneous translation exercise. Jasmine stood out so clearly that Martha called her in for a private chat. "Jasmine, where did you learn to do simultaneous translation with such quality?" "Actually, Professor, I never formally learned. It just happens naturally in my head." Martha was fascinated. That young woman had a natural talent rarely seen, even among experienced professional translators. She began mentoring her in a special way, creating custom exercises to further develop her skills. But not everything was smooth sailing at the university. A group of classmates led by Tiffany Harrington, a young woman from a wealthy family who felt threatened by Jasmine's competence, started a quiet campaign of exclusion. "She's only here because she got lucky and caught the professor's attention," Tiffany whispered to other classmates. "I bet she won't even finish the course. People like that aren't cut out for the academic world." Jasmine heard the comments and felt each word like a stab. There were moments when she questioned whether she truly belonged in that environment. Eleanor noticed her discouragement during one of their weekly conversations. "Honey, prejudice exists everywhere. The difference is how you choose to react to it. You can hide and prove them right, or you can shine so bright they'll be blind with envy." Those words became Jasmine's mantra. She decided to dedicate herself even more to her studies, joining every possible research group, offering to help with extra projects, always eager to learn more. Her chance to shine came during the second semester. The university was selected to participate in an international conference on translation and interpretation. They needed student volunteers to help with simultaneous translation during the panels. "I'd like to apply," Jasmine said to Martha. "Honey, this is very advanced. These are renowned professionals speaking on complex topics. Maybe you should attend as a listener first." "Professor, you've always said we only learn by doing. Give me a chance to prove I can contribute." Martha hesitated, but something in Jasmine's determined look convinced her. She signed her up as a volunteer for the less technical panels. On the day of the conference, Jasmine arrived 2 hours early. She wanted to review all available material on the speakers and the topics that would be covered. Her meticulous preparation caught the attention of the event coordinator, Professor Dr. Caleb Williams. "Are you one of the student volunteers?" he asked, impressed by her dedication. "Yes, sir, I'm Jasmine Williams, a third-semester student." "Third semester, and you're already working with simultaneous interpretation." "Actually, Professor, this is my first formal experience, but I've been working informally with translations for a few years, Doctor." Caleb was intrigued. She rarely saw such young students taking on such advanced activities. She decided to closely observe Jasmine's performance during the event. The first panel went smoothly. Jasmine translated a debate on foreign language teaching methodologies, moving fluently from English to Portuguese and back again. Her voice was clear, her translation precise, her pauses well-timed. During the break, Dr. Caleb approached her. "Jasmine, are you sure you're just a third-semester student?" I'm sure, Professor. Why do you ask? Because your performance out there was at a professional level. Where did you develop that technique? Jasmine briefly told her story, from the shelter to her experience at the translation company. Dr. Caleb grew more and more impressed. Have you ever considered an academic career? With that talent, you could do brilliant research on natural language acquisition. It was the first time anyone suggested she could be more than just a good translator. The idea of becoming a researcher, of contributing to scientific knowledge about languages, had never crossed her mind. The second panel brought an unexpected challenge. The keynote speaker, a renowned Chinese linguist, arrived 15 minutes late and announced he would give his presentation in Mandarin as he felt more comfortable that way. The official translator wasn't fluent in Mandarin. "We need someone who's fluent in Mandarin," said Dr. Caleb, visibly worried. "I can try," Jasmine offered timidly. "You speak Mandarin?" "Yes, I do, Professor." Dr. Caleb didn't have many options. He decided to give her a chance, hoping for the best. When Jasmine began simultaneously translating the lecture on Chinese regional dialects, a reverent silence fell over the auditorium. She wasn't just translating the words, she managed to convey the cultural nuances, the wordplay, even the speaker's subtle humor. The speaker himself stopped mid-presentation to compliment her. "This young woman isn't just translating my words," he said, now in English so everyone could understand. "She's capturing my linguistic soul." The entire auditorium gave her a standing ovation. Jasmine felt tears in her eyes, but not from sadness this time. It was pure emotion from recognition, from belonging, from knowing she was finally in the right place. After the event, Dr. Caleb approached her again. "Jasmine, I want to make you a proposal. How about starting a scientific initiation project with me? We'll study how you developed these linguistic skills, and maybe we can help other people develop similar talents." It was more than she had ever dreamed, not just studying at the university, but contributing to real scientific research that could help others like her. In the following months, Jasmine split her time between regular classes, the research project with Dr. Caleb, and the occasional testimonies related to the Thornton translations case. The investigation was progressing, and Victor Thornton had finally been located and arrested. Bernard was also facing trouble. His assets were frozen while the courts investigated his involvement in the scheme. Ironically, the apartment he had so desperately wanted to take back from Jasmine had been seized as part of the assets under investigation. Eleanor remained a key pillar in Jasmine's life. Besides being a lawyer, she had become a sort of adopted grandmother, offering not just legal support but emotional support as well. "You know I'm very proud of you, right?" Eleanor said during one of their weekly dinners. "Seeing how you turned a terrible situation into an opportunity for growth is inspiring. I never would have made it without you, Mrs. Eleanor. You came into my life exactly when I needed you most." "Nonsense. I just saw what was already there. Talent, determination, intelligence. All of that was always yours." During the 4th semester at Sterling Academy, Jasmine received an offer that would completely change her path. The International Interpreters Guild had learned about her case through the buzz from the conference. They offered her a full scholarship to pursue a master's degree at a European university, specializing in multilingual translation. "This is the opportunity of my life," she told Eleanor, but with a hint of hesitation in her voice. But I'm scared. What if I can't keep up with the level over there? What if they find out I'm not as good as they think?" Eleanor smiled warmly. "My dear, you've already proven your worth more times than you should have. Now it's time to believe in yourself as much as I believe in you." Martha also encouraged her to accept the offer. "Jasmine, you have a gift that shouldn't go to waste. Over there you'll have access to resources and opportunities that would be impossible here. Besides, you can always come back." The final decision came during a conversation with Dr. Caleb about the research they were developing together. "Professor, is our work on natural language acquisition really helping other students?" "Jasmine, the method we developed based on your experience is already being tested at 3 different universities. The preliminary results are extraordinary. Students following the protocol we created from your story are developing language skills much faster than with the traditional method. So our work can really make a difference in other people's lives. It can, and it is. But imagine what you could discover with access to state-of-the-art labs, with contact with researchers from all over the world. You could revolutionize how we understand language acquisition. That's when Jasmine decided to accept the scholarship, but not without making a promise to herself. She would use everything she learned to come back and help young people in similar situations to hers. The farewell was emotional. Eleanor, Martha, Dr. Caleb, and even some classmates who had initially treated her with suspicion came to see her off at the airport. Tiffany Harrington, who had led the campaign to exclude her, approached awkwardly. "Jasmine, I want to apologize. I was unfair to you. Honestly, I was jealous of your talent." "Tiffany, thank you for being honest, but please know that I never wanted to compete with anyone. I only wanted to learn and grow." "That's exactly why you deserve this opportunity. I hope everything works out for you over there." During the flight, Jasmine reflected on everything that had happened. 2 years ago, she was in the courtroom, humiliated by a judge who doubted her abilities. Now she was heading to Europe to study at one of the best universities in the world. Life at the European university was challenging in ways she hadn't expected. Not so much because of the academic content. She found that her natural talent gave her an edge even over the more prepared classmates, but because of the cultural adjustment and the feeling of not belonging that sometimes haunted her. In the first few months, she had moments of self-doubt. The other students seemed so sophisticated, with their cultural references, their world travels, their influential family connections. She felt like an imposter who had gotten there by luck. It was during one of those moments that she got a call from Eleanor. "Sweetheart, from your emails, I can tell you're being too hard on yourself. Remember when you told me that in the courtroom you felt small in front of that arrogant judge? I remember. And what happened in the end? I proved him wrong. Exactly. You're not there by luck or favor. You're there because you deserve it, because you have the competence to be there. Don't let anyone, not even yourself, convince you otherwise." Those words gave Jasmine the strength she needed. She began participating more actively in classroom discussions, sharing her unique perspectives on language acquisition and contributing her distinctive experience. Her master's project attracted international attention. She was developing a methodology for language teaching based on contextualized social immersion, essentially artificially reproducing the conditions she had lived naturally at the shelter and later at work. "You realize you're creating a pedagogical revolution, don't you?" remarked her advisor, Professor Dr. Gregory Sterling. "Your approach is showing results that contradict decades of established theory." "Professor, I'm just trying to understand how my brain processed everything I learned. If I can explain it scientifically, maybe other people can benefit." "Jasmine, you have the humility of true geniuses. You still think it's just luck, when in fact you're rewriting what we know about linguistic neuroplasticity." In the second year of her master's, Jasmine made a discovery that would change everything. Through neuroimaging exams, she and her team discovered that her brain had developed atypical neural connections between the areas responsible for language processing and auditory memory. It was an adaptation that explained not only her ability to learn languages, but also her exceptional memory for conversations. "This means other people can develop similar abilities if properly stimulated," she explained to Dr. Sterling. "It means you may have discovered a way to enhance human linguistic capability. Jasmine, this is Nobel Prize material." The research gained international prominence. Jasmine was invited to present her findings at conferences around the world. Universities began implementing programs based on her methodology. She had become, without realizing it, one of the world's leading authorities on multilingual acquisition. But academic success didn't make her forget her roots or her promises. She kept in regular contact with Eleanor, who proudly followed each achievement. "Sweetheart, have you thought about what you're going to do after you finish your master's?" "Mrs. Eleanor, I have an idea. I want to go back to the country and create a social program to identify and develop linguistic talents in underprivileged youth. Use everything I've learned here to give opportunities I almost didn't have." "That's wonderful, but how do you plan to fund such a project?" I have some offers from American and European universities for PhD programs with generous scholarships. If I accept one, I can use part of the money to fund the social program." Eleanor felt her heart swell with pride. That young woman she had found lost at the Justice Center had become not just a successful academic, but had kept her humanity and her desire to give back. At the end of her master's, Jasmine had to make a difficult decision. Prestige Ivy University, Sterling Academy, the Humanities Institute, and Eastern University offered her PhD positions. They were opportunities any academic would dream of, but she also received an unusual offer. The Brazilian government, through the Department of Education, offered to create a special institute for linguistic research, with her as scientific director. It would be a prestigious position that would give her resources to develop both research and social programs. The decision was made during a visit to the country over the holidays. She returned to the shelter where she had grown up, now as a renowned researcher, but still the same person inside. "Dr. Jasmine," the children shouted when she arrived. She laughed at being called doctor even before earning the title. "Hey everyone, I came here to talk to you about something important." She gathered the children in the same hall where Mrs. Esther used to tell stories in Hungarian years ago. Now she was the one with stories to tell. "How many of you speak more than one language?" she asked. Several little hands went up. As expected, many of the refugee children or children of immigrants had linguistic skills that were neither recognized nor properly developed. "What do you think about starting a special program here, where you can learn to use the talents you already have?" The children's eyes lit up with the same curiosity she herself had felt years ago. That night, Jasmine made her final decision. She turned down all international offers and accepted the job of leading the institute in the country. She would use her position to create a national network for identifying and developing linguistic talents in underserved communities. The institute opened 2 years later at a ceremony attended by education officials from several countries. Jasmine, now Dr. Jasmine Williams, was radiant beside Eleanor, Martha, Dr. Caleb, and all the people who had believed in her. But the person she most wanted to see was in the front row, Judge Dr. Arthur Harrison Miller. "Dr. Arthur, thank you for coming." "Dr. Jasmine, I wouldn't have missed it for the world. You know that day in court changed my life too, right?" "How so?" "After what happened with you, I started questioning how many talents I must have overlooked throughout my career due to bias or unconscious prejudice. It completely changed the way I conduct my hearings." "Doctor, you weren't cruel to me that day. You just did what anyone would do based on appearances. The difference is that you knew how to recognize when you were wrong and gave the truth a chance to come out. Still, I apologize for my initial reaction, and I'm very proud of who you've become." During the ceremony, Jasmine gave a speech that moved everyone present. 5 years ago, I was in this same country, in a courtroom, trying to prove I deserved a second chance. Today I'm here dedicating an institute that will give first chances to young people who might never have had them. This was only possible because some extraordinary people believed in me when even I didn't believe in myself. She looked at Eleanor, who was discreetly wiping away tears. "I learned that talent without opportunity is like a seed without soil, and that our responsibility, when we receive opportunities, is to prepare the ground so that other seeds can grow too." The institute started with 50 students from various communities. Within 3 years, it had expanded to 20 cities, identifying and developing over 2,000 young people with exceptional linguistic talents. Many of them received scholarships. Some pursued academic careers. Others became translators, interpreters, teachers. Jasmine kept her promise not only to give back, but to multiply the opportunities she had received. Her teaching method, now formalized and scientifically tested, was being adopted in dozens of countries. 5 years after the institute's opening, she received an unexpected phone call. "Dr. Jasmine, this is the Global Literature Award Committee." Jasmine almost dropped the phone. "What?" "You have been nominated for the Global Literature Award for your groundbreaking contributions to the understanding of human language and for developing methodologies that democratized access to linguistic knowledge." When she hung up the phone, Jasmine sat in silence for several minutes. She remembered the frightened young woman who had said, "I speak 16 languages," in a hostile courtroom, and she could hardly believe the path life had taken. The award came with worldwide recognition, but also with even greater responsibility. Jasmine used the international platform to amplify her message about inclusive education and talent identification in marginalized communities. In her acceptance speech for the award, she said words that would become famous. "This award isn't mine, it belongs to every young woman like me who has ever been underestimated because of her background. It belongs to every talent that was almost wasted for lack of opportunity. And it belongs to all the people who chose to bet on invisible potential when it would have been easier to ignore them." Eleanor, now 80 years old, watched the speech on the television in her apartment, with tears streaming freely down her face. "I told you you'd shine so bright they'd be blind with envy," she murmured, smiling. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, feel free to hit like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. 10 years had passed since the day Jasmine stepped into that courthouse wearing an orange jumpsuit. Now she was back in the same building, but this time as a special guest to launch a talent identification program within the justice system. The courthouse had changed. Dr. Arthur, now retired, was present at the ceremony. He had become one of Jasmine's biggest supporters, often sharing her story in talks about social justice and second chances. "Dr. Jasmine," he said during the ceremony, "that day was one of the most important of my career. Not because of the legal discoveries we made, but because of the lesson in humility I received. Dr. Arthur, you've become an example of how we can all learn and grow, regardless of age or position." The program they were launching would identify young people with special talents who came through the justice system for minor offenses or social issues. Instead of simply prosecuting them, the system would offer development opportunities through the methods Jasmine had developed. Bernard Vance was also present, but in a very different situation. After serving his sentence for involvement in the money laundering scheme, he had sought out Jasmine to apologize in person. "Dr. Jasmine, I know I have no right to ask for forgiveness for what I did, but I wanted you to know that I've learned from my mistakes. Mr. Bernard, we all deserve chances to start over. If you've truly changed, that's what matters." Bernard had become a volunteer at one of the Institute's centers, helping with administrative tasks. It was his way of trying to make amends, even if minimally, for the harm he had caused. Victor Thornton had also been released from prison and tried to contact Jasmine several times, but she chose to keep her distance. Some wounds take longer to heal, and she wasn't ready for that forgiveness yet. The Institute had expanded internationally with branches in 15 countries. The Jasmine Williams method, as it became known, was transforming language education on a global scale. Universities from around the world sent researchers to study her techniques. But for Jasmine, the greatest success wasn't the awards or international recognition. It was receiving letters from young people like her who had found their vocations through the Institute's programs. One such letter particularly moved her. It was from a young Syrian refugee who had been identified by the program as having exceptional talent for languages. Now she was studying at a European university and planning to return to help other refugees. "Dr. Jasmine," the young woman wrote, "when I arrived in the country, I barely spoke English and felt invisible. Through your program, I discovered that speaking Arabic, Kurdish, and French wasn't just a survival necessity, but a talent I could use to help others. Now I'm studying to become an international interpreter. Thank you for teaching me that our origins do not determine our destiny." Reading letters like this, Jasmine always remembered Eleanor's words. "Talent without opportunity is like a seed without soil." Eleanor remained a constant presence in her life, now as an advisor to the Institute. At 85, she kept the same sharp wit and energy she had shown on that first day in court. "Sweetheart, sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't decided to go to court on that specific day. Mrs. Eleanor, I believe destiny always finds a way to put us on the right path. If it hadn't been you that day, maybe it would have been someone else at another time. Maybe, but I'm glad it was me. But watching you grow and become this extraordinary woman has been one of the greatest privileges of my life. Martha, now head of the Department of Letters at the university where Jasmine had studied, implemented the Williams method as a mandatory part of the curriculum. Former students from the program were spread across the world, working in international organizations, universities, and multinational companies. Jasmine, do you realize you've created an entire generation of multilingual professionals who might never have had the opportunity? Martha commented during a visit to the institute. Martha, the most important thing isn't how many professionals we've created, but how many people discovered they were capable of more than they ever imagined. Dr. Caleb continued collaborating with the Institute's research, now as senior researcher. His studies on linguistic neuroplasticity, based on Jasmine's case, had opened up entire fields of scientific investigation. Jasmine, do you have any idea the impact your story has had on neuroscience? There are labs all over the world trying to figure out how to artificially reproduce the conditions that led to the development of your abilities. Caleb, as long as they use that knowledge to help people, I'm happy. The method developed by Jasmine was not limited to language teaching. The principles of contextual immersion and social learning she had formalized were being applied in various educational fields, from math to music. One of the Institute's most ambitious projects was the Reverse Exchange Program. Young talents from developed countries came to study learning techniques in underserved Brazilian communities, learning not only languages but also about resilience, adaptability, and emotional intelligence. Megan Bradley, a young American from prestige Ivy University who participated in the program, wrote in her report, "I came to the country thinking I was going to teach English. So I've learned more about language, life, and humanity in 3 months here than in all my previous academic years." These exchanges created an international network of young people attuned to social issues and committed to inclusive education. Many of them returned to their countries and implemented local versions of the Institute's programs. Jasmine's story also inspired changes in the judicial system. Courts in several countries began implementing programs to identify special talents in young people going through legal proceedings. The purely punitive approach was being complemented by a perspective of potential development. Judge Dr. Arthur became an international consultant in this new judicial approach. Jasmine's case taught me that behind every person who comes to court, there is a complex story and often untapped potential, he would say in his lectures. Our responsibility is not only to judge what has been done, but also to consider what can be built. Tiffany Harrington, the former colleague who had led the campaign to exclude Jasmine at the university, had also completely changed her perspective. She became one of the leading advocates for educational inclusion programs and often used her own story as an example of how prejudice can blind people to obvious talents. "I wasted 2 years of college trying to tear down someone who was clearly superior to me in every way," she admitted during a lecture on inclusion at the university. "Jasmine could have hated me for what I did, but she chose to forgive me and even help me grow. That taught me more about character than any book ever could." 15 years after that day in court, Jasmine was invited to deliver a special lecture at the same university where she had studied. The auditorium was packed not only with students and faculty, but also with many of the young people who had gone through the Institute's programs. On the first day of lectures, she decided to start by telling her story from the beginning. Many people in the audience only knew her current academic reputation, not the details of her journey. 15 years ago, I was in a court, being accused of lying when I said I spoke 16 languages. The judge laughed in my face, and I felt smaller than ever, she began. The audience was dead silent. At that moment, I could have kept quiet, accepted people's judgment, and remained invisible. But something inside me refused to accept that my worth was determined by appearances. She told them about Eleanor, about Martha, about Dr. Caleb, about every person who had chosen to bet on her when it would have been easier to ignore her. What I've learned on this journey is that we all have unique talents. But talent without opportunity is like having buried treasure, and sometimes we need other people to help us dig it up. In the audience, a young student raised her hand to ask a question. "Dr. Jasmine, you said you spoke 16 languages that day. How many languages do you speak today?" Jasmine smiled. "Today I speak 23 languages fluently. I can communicate in 12 more, and I'm learning 3 new ones. But it's not the number that matters. It's what we do with what we know. After the lecture, a long line of students formed to speak with her personally. Each story she heard reminded her of herself years ago. Talented young people who felt lost, misunderstood, underestimated. A young Native American woman told her she spoke 4 native languages, but had never considered it a special talent until hearing the lecture. A boy who was the son of Japanese immigrants mentioned that he always felt ashamed of mixing English and Japanese at home, not realizing he was naturally bilingual. "You know there's an institute that can help you develop those talents, right?" Jasmine joked, drawing laughter from the audience. But beyond the laughter, there was hope. Every young person who left that conversation carried with them the certainty that their unique talents had value, no matter how they were seen by society. On the last day of events at the university, there was a special surprise. Dr. Arthur, now over 80 years old, made a point to be there. He asked to speak for a few minutes before Jasmine. "Young people," he said, his voice still strong, "let me tell you about the day I learned the most important lesson of my legal career." He recounted Jasmine's case from his perspective, publicly admitting his initial prejudices and how he had almost committed a terrible injustice. "If I had stuck with my first impression, the world would have lost one of the greatest educational contributions of our era, and I would have missed the chance to learn that wisdom can come from anyone, of any age, from any background." When Jasmine took the stage after his testimony, she was visibly moved. "Dr. Arthur taught me that recognizing our mistakes doesn't diminish us, it elevates us. That a change in perspective is a sign of intelligence, not weakness." The event concluded with the launch of a new program, international scholarship specifically aimed at young people from underserved communities with exceptional linguistic talents. The program bore the joint name Montgomery Miller, honoring the 2 people who had most influenced Jasmine's journey. Eleanor, who watched the event via video conference due to her advanced age, was moved to learn of the tribute. "My dear, when I die, I want you to know that I lived long enough to see you change the world. I couldn't ask for a better legacy than that." "Mrs. Eleanor, you're not going to die any time soon. We still have a lot of work ahead," Jasmine replied, trying to control her emotions. But Eleanor was right about one thing. She had lived long enough to see the full impact of her decision that day in court. The simple act of believing in an unknown young woman had turned into a global movement for educational inclusion. In the years that followed, the Institute expanded its activities even further. Special programs were created to identify talent in prisons, shelters, isolated rural communities, and refugee groups. Each context brought new discoveries about how human potential manifests in different circumstances. One of the most striking cases was that of Silas Baptist, a young man from a riverside community in the Everglades who spoke 5 indigenous languages and had developed his own system of translation between them. When identified by the program, Silas could barely read in English. 2 years later, he was studying linguistics at a federal university and working on preserving endangered languages. "Dr. Silas," Jasmine joked during one of his visits to the Institute, "soon you'll know more languages than I do. Dr. Jasmine, the difference is that I learned from you that what matters isn't how many languages we know, but how we use that knowledge to connect people and preserve cultures." Stories like Silas's multiplied by the thousands. The Institute had become not just an educational center, but a social movement that challenged traditional ways of identifying and developing talent. Jasmine's methodology also influenced public education policies. Several countries reformed their curricula to include early identification of special talents in underserved communities. The concept of multilingual intelligence, she had coined, became part of the international pedagogical vocabulary. But perhaps the most profound impact was on how society began to view young people from humble backgrounds. Jasmine's story had become a symbol that talent exists in all social classes, needing only opportunity to flourish. In a television interview, 20 years after the incident in court, Jasmine was asked what she considered her greatest legacy. "I hope it's proving that where we're born doesn't determine how far we can go, and that everyone who receives an opportunity has a responsibility to open doors for others. The host then asked if she still remembered exactly the words she had spoken that day in court. Jasmine smiled, her eyes shining with the same determination as 2 decades earlier. "I speak 16 languages, Your Honor. But today I would say I speak 23 languages, and I use them all to prove that talent has no race, social class, or zip code." The studio audience gave a standing ovation. But for Jasmine, the most important applause remained that of the children at the Institute's centers when they discovered that their unique gifts had value. A few weeks after that interview, Jasmine received a special phone call. "Dr. Jasmine, this is Annabeth from Dr. Arthur's office." "Hi, Annabeth, how is the doctor?" "Dr. Jasmine, doctor. Arthur passed away yesterday very peacefully in his sleep, but he left a specific letter for you." Jasmine felt as if the ground had opened up beneath her feet. Dr. Arthur had become more than just an acquaintance. He was a living symbol that people can change, grow, and redeem themselves. The letter was long and handwritten in the elegant cursive she knew well. "Dear Jasmine, if you're reading this letter, it means my journey has come to an end. But what an extraordinary journey it was, especially after that day we met. You know you changed my life as much as I may have changed yours. Before we met, I was a competent judge but blind to many subtle injustices I committed daily. You taught me that true wisdom lies in recognizing when we are wrong and having the courage to change. I've spent the last 20 years of my life trying to make up for all the talents I may have overlooked throughout my career. I'll never know how many Jasmines I let slip by, but I hope the changes I implemented in the system have helped at least a few. I want you to know that I consider you the daughter I never had. Watching you grow, take on the world, and then use that success to lift others was the greatest privilege of my old age. Keep doing what you do. Keep proving that human potential knows no boundaries, and know that wherever I am, I'll be cheering for you and for all the young talents you have yet to discover. With love and eternal admiration, Dr. Arthur Harrison Miller, P.S. I left instructions for part of my inheritance to go to the Institute. It's my way of apologizing to all the talents I failed to recognize throughout my life." Jasmine cried like she hadn't in years. Losing Dr. Arthur felt like losing a father she had gained late in life. But her tears were both sadness and gratitude. Sadness for the loss, gratitude for the transformation he had allowed in her life. Dr. Arthur's funeral was a celebration of change and redemption. Not only his colleagues from the bench attended, but dozens of young people whose lives had been impacted by the reforms he had implemented in the justice system, inspired by Jasmine's story. During the ceremony, Jasmine was invited to speak. "Dr. Arthur taught me that it's never too late to change, to grow, to become a better version of yourself. He could have remained the judge he was, competent but limited by his biases. Instead, he chose to become a force for social change." She paused, looking at all the faces in the church, young and old, rich and poor, people from all backgrounds who had been touched by Dr. Arthur's transformation. His legacy isn't just in the verdicts he handed down, but in the lives he chose to transform after learning he was wrong. That is courage. That is wisdom. That is what we should all aspire to be. After the funeral, life went on, but with an even deeper meaning for Jasmine. Dr. Arthur's inheritance allowed the Institute to expand its programs to even more remote areas, reaching young people in situations of extreme vulnerability. One new program was especially innovative, identifying talents in young people who had committed minor offenses. Instead of simply punishing them, the system offered potential development as an alternative to prison. Caleb Williams, a namesake of Dr. Caleb but not related, was one of those young people. At 17, he had been caught selling pirated goods on the street. During the hearing, it was discovered that he fluently spoke Spanish, English, and French, learned by interacting with tourists to sell his products. "Caleb," asked the judge, inspired by Dr. Arthur's methods, "where did you learn these languages?" "Right on the streets, Your Honor. Tourists pay better when you speak their language." Instead of convicting him, the judge referred him to Jasmine's program. 2 years later, Caleb was studying international tourism and working as an official city guide, using his language skills legally and productively. "Dr. Jasmine," he said during a visit to the Institute, "if it weren't for this program, I'd be in jail or dead. You saved my life. Caleb, you saved your own life when you decided to accept the opportunity. I only offered a door. You chose to walk through it. Stories like Caleb's became common in the Institute's annual reports. The recidivism rate among youths who went through the programs was just 3%, compared to 70% in the traditional system. These numbers drew international attention. Countries like the Netherlands, Denmark, and New Zealand sent commissions to study the Brazilian model of restorative justice based on talent development. It's surprising, commented Dr. Erik Henderson, a Danish criminologist who spent 3 months studying the program, how a shift in perspective can completely transform the outcomes of a system. Instead of asking how to punish, you ask how to develop. It's revolutionary. The model spread quickly. Within 5 years, similar programs were operating in over 30 countries. Jasmine had become, unintentionally, a reformer of the global juvenile justice system, but she never forgot her roots. Every year, on the anniversary of that day in court, she visited the same building where it all began. There was now a commemorative plaque in the lobby, the Dr. Arthur Institute for Talent Development, where every potential is recognized. On the 25th year visit, she met a young lawyer in the hallway, visibly nervous for her first hearing. "First time?" asked Jasmine, smiling. "Yeah, I'm really nervous. It's a case of a young woman accused of document forgery. She insists she was just trying to get work, but she can't prove her qualifications." Jasmine felt a chill down her spine. The situation eerily echoed her own story. "Can I ask what kind of qualifications she claims to have? She says she speaks 6 languages, but she has no degree or certificates. Everyone thinks it's a lie." "And you? What do you think? Honestly? There's something in the way she talks that makes me believe her, but how to prove it?" Jasmine smiled, remembering Mrs. Eleanor in that same corridor decades ago. "Want a suggestion? Ask her to demonstrate. Sometimes the most powerful evidence isn't on paper." The young lawyer looked at her curiously. "Are you a lawyer too?" "I'm an educator. My name is Jasmine Williams." The young woman's eyes widened. "Dr. Jasmine Williams? From the Institute? Oh my God, I read all your work in college." "Then you know that sometimes the most extraordinary talents show up where we least expect them." The young lawyer followed the advice. During the hearing, she asked her client to demonstrate her language skills. The young woman translated documents in real time, impressing everyone present. It turned out she had grown up in a community where several indigenous languages were spoken, naturally developing multilingual abilities. Instead of a conviction, she received a scholarship at Jasmine's Institute. "It's amazing how history repeats itself," commented the young lawyer to Jasmine after the hearing. "Your story really changed how the system works." "It wasn't my story that changed the system," Jasmine replied. "It was the willingness of people like Dr. Arthur, Mrs. Eleanor, you, to look beyond appearances and give people real chances." At that moment, Jasmine realized that her legacy wasn't just in the institute or the awards she had won. It was in the cultural shift she had helped create, a society more willing to recognize and cultivate talent, regardless of where it was found. At 50 years old, Jasmine Williams was still discovering young talents, but she was also shaping a new generation of educators and social reformers. Her former students were scattered across the globe, replicating the Institute's methods and creating their own innovations. Megan Bradley, one of her first students, had started a similar program in Mexico focused on preserving indigenous languages through developing young native talent. Chen Wei, a former Chinese student, developed methodologies to identify linguistically gifted individuals in rural communities across Asia. "Dr. Jasmine," Chen said during an international video conference of alumni, "do you realize you've created a worldwide network of talent hunters?" "Chen, you all created that. I just planted a seed. You made the forest grow." And it had truly become a forest. The annual reports showed impressive numbers. Over 200,000 young people identified and developed in programs based on the Williams method across 50 different countries. Of those, more than 15,000 had entered universities, 8,000 worked as professional translators or interpreters, and hundreds had become researchers, diplomats, or founded their own social organizations. But for Jasmine, the most important number was another: 0. 0 young people who had gone through the programs and later committed serious crimes. 0 talents wasted for lack of opportunity. In an interview marking the Institute's 25th anniversary, the journalist asked what had been the most rewarding moment of her career. "There have been many," she replied, "but perhaps the most special was when a former student called me to say she had identified a young talent in her community. When I realized the cycle was complete, that the young people I had helped were now helping others, I knew our mission had succeeded." And what's next for the Institute? We're working on a project called Talents Without Borders. The idea is to create a global network where young talents from different countries can collaborate on international projects, using their language skills to solve global problems like climate change, refugees, and cultural preservation. The Talents Without Borders project was launched the following year and quickly became a model for international youth cooperation. Young people from the Institute in Brazil collaborated with peers from Africa, Asia, and Europe on projects requiring multilingual communication and cultural sensitivity. One of the first projects was creating a translation app for refugees, developed entirely by young people who had themselves been refugees or children of refugees. The app included not just linguistic translation, but cultural translation as well, helping people navigate new countries more easily. "It's poetic," remarked Mrs. Eleanor, now 90 years old, but still sharp and following all the projects. Young people who were once marginalized creating tools to help other marginalized people. Mrs. Eleanor had become not just an advisor to the Institute, but its living memory. She insisted on telling the original story to every new staff member and volunteer, ensuring they never forgot the movement's humble beginnings. "Child," she said to Jasmine during one of their monthly meetings, "sometimes I think about that day in court and wonder how many other Jasmines never had the luck of someone believing in them." Mrs. Eleanor, "That's exactly why the Institute exists, so that no Jasmine ever has to rely on luck. And it works, but you know what makes me most proud? What? That you never lost your humility. With all these awards, all this global recognition, you're still the same frightened young woman I met in that hallway, just now armed with the confidence of someone who knows her worth." Jasmine held Eleanor's hand, feeling the weight of the years but also the strength that still radiated from that extraordinary woman. "I can never repay what you've done for me." "Nonsense! You've repaid it 1,000 times over. Every young person who walks through the Institute's doors, every transformed life, every talent uncovered. That's my reward." 2 years later, Eleanor passed away in her sleep at 92. Her last conscious act had been reviewing a report on the Institute's new programs. She was found with the document in her hands and a smile on her face. Eleanor's funeral brought together over 1,000 people from around the world. Former Institute students, educators, judges, politicians, all united by the life of a woman who had chosen to believe in human potential when no one else did. Jasmine delivered the main speech, speaking through tears. Eleanor wasn't just a lawyer. She was a visionary who saw diamonds where others saw only coal. She taught me that helping one person might seem small, but that one helped person can change the world. During the ceremony, the creation of the Eleanor Montgomery Foundation for Emerging Talent Development was announced, which would secure permanent resources to identify and develop exceptional young people in vulnerable situations. Jasmine personally took on the foundation's presidency, considering it her final great mission. At 55, she had decided to dedicate the rest of her life to ensuring that the work she'd started with Eleanor would have perpetual continuity. The foundation implemented even more ambitious programs. The Inclusion Ambassadors Project trained young talents to become identifiers of other talents in their communities. It was a system of exponential multiplication that promised to reach even the most remote corners of the world. Mary Grace, a young woman from the Dust Bowl who spoke 3 indigenous languages and had learned English and Spanish through songs, became one of the first ambassadors. Within 2 years, she identified over 50 talented young people in her region, all now in development programs. "Dr. Jasmine," Mary said during a presentation, "when I discovered my own worth through the Institute, I vowed to do the same for others. It's like lighting candles. One candle can light thousands of others without losing any of its own light. That metaphor became the Foundation's official slogan, lighting talents, illuminating futures. At 60, Jasmine received a special tribute. The courthouse where it all began was renamed the Montgomery Miller Justice Center, honoring the two pillars of transformation in her life. During the unveiling ceremony for the new plaque, Jasmine gave a speech that summed up her journey. 40 years ago, I walked into this building as a desperate young woman, wearing an orange uniform, judged by my appearance before I even opened my mouth. Today, I leave here knowing this place has become a symbol of second chances and the recognition of talent. The transformation wasn't just mine, it was of an entire vision of justice and education. In the audience, hundreds of former students applauded. Many wore graduation gowns, others elegant professional attire, and a few sported the uniforms of international organizations. They all had one thing in common. They had discovered their worth through the program started in that very courthouse decades ago. Among those present was Dr. Raphael Arthur Miller, grandson of the late judge, who had followed in his grandfather's footsteps in the judiciary, but with a completely reformed perspective on social justice. Dr. Jasmine, he said after the ceremony, my grandfather always said that meeting you was the most transformative experience of his career. He taught me that true power isn't in judging, but in recognizing and nurturing the best in people. Raphael, your grandfather was proof that it's never too late to learn and change. I hope you carry on that legacy. You can count on it. Actually, I'm implementing a pilot program where every young person who comes through my court has their special skills assessed before any court decision is made. It was exactly the kind of continuity Jasmine had always dreamed of. The seed planted 40 years ago kept sprouting in new generations of social reformers. At 65, Jasmine finally decided to step away from the administrative duties of the Institute, but stayed on as a special advisor and mentor to the new directors, all former students she had personally identified and developed. Her retirement was marked by a series of international honors. UNESCO created the Jasmine Williams Inclusive Education Award. Universities on 5 continents offered Dr. Honoris Causa degrees. The Brazilian government established National Talent Recognition Day on the date of her first speech in court. But the tribute that moved her most came from an unexpected source. The young people currently in the Institute's programs created a collective book called I Speak Many Languages Too, Stories of Discovered Talents. Each chapter told the story of a young person who had found their potential through the methods Jasmine developed. This book, they wrote in the dedication, is proof that Dr. Jasmine's story wasn't unique. It was just the first of thousands that came after. Reading these stories, Jasmine realized that her greatest victory hadn't been proving she spoke 16 languages in that distant courtroom. It had been proving that exceptional talents exist everywhere, needing only someone willing to believe in and invest in them. Annabeth, a deaf young woman who developed a revolutionary method for teaching sign language to hearing people. Charles Edward, a former street kid who became an official UN interpreter. Fatima Al-Zahra, a Syrian refugee who created an NGO to teach Arabic and preserve Middle Eastern culture. They all had a similar story, talents ignored by society until they were discovered and nurtured. It's interesting, Jasmine commented during the book launch, how each of these stories could have ended completely differently. Annabeth could have kept feeling frustrated from not being able to communicate properly. Charles could have stayed on the streets. Fatima could have disappeared into the invisibility of refugee camps. The difference was just someone stopping to truly see and listen. The book became an international bestseller and was translated into over 50 languages, many of them by former students of the Institute itself. Its impact went beyond literature. Governments from several countries reshaped their educational policies after reading the stories of transformation. At 70, Jasmine moved to a small house in the same coastal town where she was born. She wanted to spend her final years connected to her roots, but without losing touch with the growth of the movement she had created. Every morning, she walked along the beach and invariably met young people from the community. Some recognized her, others didn't, but all ended up striking up a conversation. It was amazing how she could identify special talents in casual 5-minute chats. Aunt Jasmine called a young fisherwoman who had discovered she had an exceptional knack for imitating accents. "Do you think I could work with this thing I can do?" "Of course, dear. Have you heard about the institute nearby?" And so, even retired, Jasmine continued doing what she had always done best, recognizing and cultivating human potential. The institute, under new leadership, kept expanding. Specialized programs were created for different types of talents: linguistic, mathematical, artistic, social. Jasmine's original concept had evolved into a broader understanding that everyone has some kind of exceptional talent waiting to be discovered. Dr. Amanda Santos, no relation, now the Institute's General Director, held monthly meetings with Jasmine for strategic discussions. "Dr. Jasmine, we've reached the milestone of 1 million young people served globally. What do you think of this achievement?" "Amanda, numbers are impressive, but what really matters is knowing that each of these young people discovered they had value. That's something you can't measure with statistics." "And what's the next challenge, in your opinion?" "The next challenge is ensuring that the next generation of educators understands that identifying talents isn't a technique you learn. It's a perspective you cultivate. It's about genuinely believing that every person has something special to offer the world." This philosophy was incorporated into the Institute's new educator training program. Future teachers, psychologists, social workers, and even judges underwent intensive training not just in talent identification techniques, but in developing the sensitivity to see potential where others only saw problems. The program became so well known that universities worldwide began requiring the Santos Certificate as a prerequisite for professionals working with at-risk youth. At 75, Jasmine wrote her autobiography, 16 Languages and One Lesson: How a Courtroom Taught Me That Talent Has No Address. The book became required reading in education, law, and social work courses in dozens of countries. In the introduction, she wrote, "This is not just my story. It is the story of all the talents that were nearly wasted, of all the potentials that almost remained hidden, of all the people who almost never got the chance to show what they were truly worth. It is also a tribute to all the Eleanor Montgomerys and Arthur Millers of the world, people who choose to bet on human potential when it would be easier to ignore it." The book sold over 10 million copies worldwide, and all royalties were donated to the Eleanor Montgomery Foundation, ensuring perpetual funding for talent development programs. During the book's global launch, Jasmine was asked what advice she would give to young people who feel misunderstood or underestimated. "First, believe in yourselves even when no one else does. Second, find your tribes, people who see you for who you really are. And third, when you prove your worth, remember to reach out to others who are still struggling to be seen." These words became a mantra for millions of young people around the world, facing challenges similar to those she had faced decades earlier. At 80, Jasmine still maintained active correspondence with former Institute students, now spread across the globe in leadership positions. She received weekly letters reporting new talents discovered, projects implemented, lives transformed. One of the most special letters came from Kenji Tanaka, a young Japanese man who had been identified by the program as having an exceptional talent for learning African languages. Now, at 40, he was Japan's ambassador to 3 African countries and had created cultural exchange programs connecting Japanese and African youth through mutual language learning. "Dr. Jasmine," Kenji wrote, "when I was a child in Eastern University, my classmates teased me because I was fascinated by the sounds of languages I heard in documentaries about Africa. My parents thought it was just a phase that would pass. Today, I use that phase to build bridges between cultures. Thank you for teaching me that our differences are our greatest treasures." Letters like this arrived daily. Jasmine had created not just an institute, but a global movement of recognition and celebration of the diversity of human talents. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, feel free to hit the like button and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. On her 80th birthday, a global party was organized with simultaneous celebrations in 100 different cities. Former Institute students gathered in each location to share their stories and identify new talents in their communities, turning the celebration into a major potential discovery campaign. During the main ceremony, broadcast worldwide, Jasmine gave her last great public speech. 60 years ago, a frightened young woman said in a courtroom, "I speak 16 languages." Today, millions of young people around the world say with pride, "I have a unique talent, and I know it has value." That transformation didn't happen because one person changed the world. It happened because millions of people decided to see the world differently. She paused, looking at the hundreds of faces in the audience and knowing thousands more were watching worldwide. "My greatest pride isn't having proved that I spoke 16 languages. It's having helped prove that talent has no color, social class, nationality, or any other barrier society tries to impose. It's knowing that today, somewhere in the world, a misunderstood young person is getting the first real opportunity of their life." The speech ended with 5 minutes of non-stop applause. But for Jasmine, the most important applause remained the respectful silence she saw in the eyes of young people when they discovered for the first time that their unique talents had value. In the following years, Jasmine gradually reduced her public appearances, preferring to dedicate her time to writing letters of encouragement to young people in institute programs around the world. Each letter was personalized, showing she truly paid attention to each person's individual story. For Silas, a young autistic person with an exceptional knack for Sino-Tibetan languages, "Silas, your different way of processing languages isn't a limitation. It's a superpower. Use it to connect cultures that rarely meet." For Priscilla, an indigenous teenager preserving 3 endangered dialects, "Priscilla, you're not just a language speaker. You're a guardian of entire cultures. Your work is sacred." For Ahmed, a young refugee who had learned 6 languages during his forced migrations, "Ahmed, each language you learned represents a story of survival and adaptation. Use that knowledge to help other refugees find their voices." These letters became treasures for their recipients. Many framed them, others carried them in wallets like talismans of encouragement. They all conveyed the same fundamental message: you have value, your talent matters, and the world needs what you have to offer. At 85 years old, Jasmine's health began to decline, but her mind remained clear and her passion for discovering talents unshakable. She spent her final active years working on her last project, an artificial intelligence that could identify unique linguistic patterns in casual conversations, helping to discover potential talents on a global scale. "It's fascinating," she remarked to her development team, "how technology can amplify our ability to see what was always there. This AI won't replace the sensitive human eye, but it will help us not miss a single hidden gem." The system, named Eleanor, in honor of the woman who first saw her potential, was implemented in schools, community centers, and even social media networks, identifying young people with exceptional linguistic patterns who could benefit from development programs. In her final months, Jasmine received an honor that moved her more than any previous award. The United Nations declared March 15th, the date of her first court testimony, as the International Day for Recognizing Emerging Talents. "It's poetic," she whispered to her nurse, "that the date that started as the worst day of my life has become a worldwide day of hope for young talents." Jasmine Williams passed away peacefully at 87 on a Sunday morning while reviewing letters from the Institute's youth. She was found with a smile on her face and an unfinished letter on the table addressed to a young woman from Congo who had learned Portuguese through Brazilian songs. Her funeral was a global event. Presidents, prime ministers, Nobel laureates, and thousands of ordinary people gathered to honor a woman who had proven that a single person believing in invisible talents can change the course of humanity. But the real tribute came in the months that followed. Around the world, communities organized Jasmine Days, events where local youth showcased their unique talents and received support to develop them. Within 6 months, more than 50,000 young people had been identified and placed into development programs through this grassroots initiative. The Institute continued to grow under new leadership, but always guided by the core principles Jasmine had established. Every young person has a unique talent. Every community has a responsibility to nurture those talents, and every society benefits when it allows all its members to reach their full potential. 10 years after her passing, the movement Jasmine started had become an integral part of global education. The concept of culturally situated multiple intelligences, her main theoretical contribution, was taught in every pedagogy school in the world. More importantly, the question she had placed at the center of educational debate: what unique talents does this person possess, instead of what is wrong with this person, had become the standard for evaluating at-risk youth. At an international education conference held on the 20th anniversary of her death, Dr. Megan Bradley, now a 60-year-old woman and director emeritus of the Institute, shared a reflection that summed up Jasmine's legacy. Dr. Jasmine didn't discover anything new about human potential. She just reminded us of something we had forgotten, that every human being is born with unique gifts, and our responsibility as a society is to create conditions for those gifts to flourish, not to be suppressed or ignored. In the audience, hundreds of educators from around the world, many of them direct or indirect alumni of the programs Jasmine started, applauded in recognition of a truth that had transformed their practices and their lives. Today, more than half a century after that day in court, the question, "How many languages do you speak?" has become a global symbol of recognizing diverse talents. Schools, courts, and community centers around the world have plaques with a phrase that has become iconic: "Here every talent is valued." And somewhere a misunderstood young person is about to discover that their unique abilities have value. Maybe she speaks several languages like Jasmine, maybe she has completely different gifts. But she will surely find someone willing to believe in her, because Jasmine Williams proved that betting on human potential is always the best investment we can make. Jasmine's story reminds us that behind every troubled young person, there may be an extraordinary talent waiting to be discovered. That behind every humble appearance, there may be a potential that will change the world. And that behind every prejudice overcome, there is an opportunity for growth for both those who judge and those who are judged. 60 years later, when young people around the world proudly speak of their unique talents, whether speaking languages, creating art, solving complex problems, or connecting people, they echo the brave words of a young woman who one day dared to say, "I speak 16 languages," and the world was never the same again. The end. This was a fictional story created to touch our hearts. Now tell us what you thought of this journey of Jasmine's transformation. Do you believe exceptional talents exist in every community, just needing an opportunity to flourish? Share your opinion in the comments, and if this story inspired you, leave a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other emotional stories about overcoming and discovering human potential.